それでは委員会を再開いたします。
We would like to resume this meeting. Mr. Kurokawa, Chairman, please. Yes, the second witness is former Director General of the Nuclear and Industry Safety Agency and Special Advisor to the Cabinet Office, Mr. Kenkichi Hirose. We would like to go to Q&A right away. Thank you very much for your attendance. As you know, Mr. Hirose is one of the Director Generals of the Nuclear Industry Safety Agency. He has a doctor's degree, an expert on nuclear matters, and he has also served as the Director General of the Secretariat of NSC. After the accident, I think it was on the 28th of March last year that he became Special Advisor to the Cabinet Office responding to these matters. Today, we do have this expert who has been with the regulator for so many years. We would like Mr. Hirose to talk to us about some of the challenges and issues that we are confronted with. And I think that is going to go toward restoring trust for Japan and a message to the operator and the regulator in Japan. Thank you.
Now, first, you have served as Secretary General of NISA as well as NSC, and as an expert in the nuclear engineering at different times in your life work. You have embarked upon the safety, and I'd like to know what focus it had been, especially for the safety of nuclear in Japan. What were some of the challenges, and what were things you did from your position based upon your expertise? I'd like you to inform us of 2 to 3 major highlights in responding to my question. Can I be seated as I respond to you, sir? Thank you for the introduction. This is Hirose speaking. I serve as the Secretary General of Nuclear Safety Related Committee and also Director General of NISA. As the chair of the commission has rightly stated, it's true that when I was the Secretary General, a seismic reinforcement was one of the important issues when I served as the Secretary General of NSC. And when I was the Director General of NISA, the strengthening of the regulation of the operation was the main focus. And it was from different aspects that I have embarked upon many of the challenges we faced. It was in 1974 I joined the Agency of Science and Technology at that time. And since then, I have mainly worked on the nuclear safety-related issues in my career. Originally, we wanted to have a good design. And with good design, we felt that we can assure the safety of the nuclear power plants. And that was the basic philosophy and the position. Thereafter, the experiences accumulated in the operation of the nuclear power plants. And since then, together with a good design, it was said that securing safety is equally important in the operation of the nuclear power plant, not limited to the design. And to do so, the regulation at the operation of the nuclear power plants, especially in regard to, for example, we want the nuclear power plants operators to engage in different kinds of inspections and testing, which is going to be overseen strictly by the regulators. And nuclear safety management system was introduced. And in securing the safety of the nuclear power plants from the time of the design as well as during the operation, I must say that these are two wheels of the vehicles in which the two needs to be balanced. And I felt that this to be quite important. May I interrupt? Based upon your experience, from the standpoint of NSC and NISA, you are an expert who understands the function of the two organizations. So after the accident, Mr. Madarame, the chair, felt that he was alone in exercising the decisions. At that time, what was the role of NSC? Why is it that NSC was an outsider? Why was NSC was not able to function? Why is it Madarame, Dr. Madarame said he was alone? Mr. TAKEKURO was an expert, but it seems that can you imagine as why it happened to be that Dr. Madarame made the kind of comment? He said that he was alone in rendering decision. I don't know what happened then, but Dr. Madarame, the chair of NSC, did not get enough information from the site, from the front line. That's why I take it that it was difficult for him to render the appropriate decisions. When anytime an accident like that takes place, it's important to obtain the information from the site in appropriate manner so that people related to the safety will be able to grasp and share the information to render the necessary decisions. And I believe that kind of line of communication and information are important. But I take it that at this time, that was not sufficient. Very briefly, sir, you have also served as DG of NISA. You serve as, in a way, the secretariat, and I'm sure you would be busy, but do you think the DG and NISA had worked well and functioned well, even amidst the difficult time this time? Do you have any words for your junior DGs and people at the NISA that you might want to scold them that they haven't done quite a good job? Or, I mean, as a senior, you need to train and educate your younger and junior fellows, and I wanted to hear comments like that. I shall be repeating myself, but whether NISA, I must say that NISA was not able to grasp the information in an appropriate manner. So I would say that at that point of time, NISA should have engaged so as to obtain the information appropriately on April the 12th. It was stated in a press conference that the accident was level 7. At that time, you were already the special advisor. Did you tell the NISA and others that they need to be public and to be open? Did you give recommendation that they should be disclosing as much information as possible? Originally, it was stated it was level 4, 5, 6, then 7. On the 12th of April, before that, a few days before April the 12th, it was stated that the accident in Fukushima had released so much radioactive substance to the outside, so that it was more or less seen that it should be defined as level 7 accidents. it was necessary for the world at large to grasp that. And that was one of the evaluation of INES as well. So in regard to the determination of level 7, I was already at the Cabinet Office, but I did say proactively to NISA that I did participate in the evaluation, and I encouraged that NISA and ourselves should work together to come to the conclusion into the evaluation of the level. One point, this is very personal question. There's a manual that was published on April the 8th about the nuclear power plants, and in the introduction, this was written in March. And didn't you feel that you wanted to revise that from the outset? I mean, it was too late to stop the publication. It was after it was made public that the accident. So it's not April the 8th. All the printing had been concluded, and it was in a booklet and a manual, and then the accident. So it was not. I mean, wouldn't you try to stop the distribution? That's what I thought. Microphone, please. I'm going to ask Mr. Nomura to raise the questions. Mr. Nomura, please.
My name is Nomura. I would like to ask you several questions on behalf of the Commission. As you just mentioned, the basic premise is that Safety Commission Secretariat, the Secretary General, and also you were serving as the NISA DG as well. Could you explain the relationship between the two organizations, NSC and NISA? Nuclear Safety Commission is located within the Cabinet Office. And NISA belongs to the METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. So nuclear safety-related primary administration is to be done by the NISA, and also that is overseen by the NSC. That is a relationship between the two agencies. So our checking function is to be conducted by the Commission. Yes, most pertinent example is that NSC, the NISA carries out the primary inspection of the siting license, and the secondary review is to be done by NSC. And the primary, in order to see whether there is a defect in the review done by NISA in the primary stage. In 2006, you have 2006 data. So the aseismic guideline was published, and that guideline was produced by the Commission, NSC. That is correct. Then, on the part of NISA, what kind of role did NISA play in this regard? So NSC came up with the guideline, and after that, NISA, based on that guideline, carries out safety and regulation administration. So based on that, the guideline, we require the operators to abide by it. So these two organizations have a check and control function. However, according to explanation regarding aseismic guideline that was published by the NSC, and based on that, following that guideline, NISA carries out the study and carries out inspection on the utility. The NISA, you said whether or not NISA inspects the NSC's guideline once before implementing it. Rather, we consider how we should implement NSC published guidelines in practice. So you are going to concretize NSC's guideline at the NISA. So 2006 new guideline was issued, and the NISA made a safety guideline. And at that time, what was your position? At NISA, based on the guideline, I was trying to concretize the NSC's guideline at the NISA. So you were DG in 2006, right? Yes, at the NISA, I was Director General. From 2005 to 2007, you served as the DG of NISA. And as you just explained, in 2006, at that time, NSC, of course, published the new guideline, which is very important guideline with a new concept included. Based on that, back-checking was introduced. So this is a very important guideline. I remember, I understand that on the 19th of September, it was published. So from the, and based on that, NISA issued a seismic standard. After what kind of interval after the issuance of guideline did NISA come up with a seismic standard? I don't know. We can investigate immediately. I think that was on the next day, namely September 20th. So you had an internal discussion only one day. Regarding NSC's a seismic review guideline, and NISA has been following the development process of this guideline so far. So in introducing this guideline into our design standard, that was done in parallel. So it seems that these two organizations are rather integrated in reality. We can consider those two organizations as one office. Well, NSC's guideline was done at the National Diet, and we were closely monitoring the development process of this guideline, and as a result, we prepared for necessary standards which would be in line with this guideline. Safety guideline and also a seismic guideline of NSC or NISA's standard. These have to be approved by the minister. The NSC's guideline is decided by the commission itself. However, regarding NISA, since we are regulatory agency and administrator, ministerial ordinance and notice, those communications would take an appropriate form, and we have to come up with the appropriate form. That means you already received approval from the minister. Otherwise, you won't be able to issue the standard on the next day, the 20th of April. So we have been closely watching the process of NSC guideline development, so we were fully prepared. According to your earlier explanation, the guideline was issued, and based on that guideline, you make a judgment and you concretize that guideline. However, in parallel with the development of guideline, you were making preparations. So even on the next day, you were able to receive minister's approval in a very prompt manner. Yes, that is the correct understanding. So regarding the how regulatory agents should work has different opinions. So do you think you are fulfilling your checking function as a regulatory agency? Check and control. So these two administrative organizations have to be separate. However, it seems that these two organizations were serving in a more or less integrated manner. Was there any meaning for these two organizations to be separate? NSC and NISA NISA's safety regulatory administration was reported to the NSC, and appropriate instruction and guidance has been provided by the Commission. So I think primary and secondary roles by each organization respectively has been performed. Mr. Madarame came to this commission meeting in the past, and in-depth defense in relation to that, in the world, it is common to have a 5-layer defense. However, in Japan, we had only 3-layer defense, and that was a problem, according to Mr. Madarame. So such a criticism exists. So in this relation, was there any problem in relation to what NISA was doing? On that point, I don't think there was a specific problem on our part. NISA, regarding severe accident, was of the view that severe accident response had to be made into rules or regulation. Wasn't it the case? Regarding severe accident, internationally, the various rules and regulations were introduced, and also severe accident-related accident management have been made into rules in various countries. We were aware of that development in the international community, so we thought that we should take a step further, and we felt the need to move in that direction. So that means you are making the efforts to that effect, right? What kind of concrete efforts were underway?
Now, I don't have clear recollection of that. To power operators, I think you have already conveyed to them about the policy to make it into rules. And through communication, such as study sessions, such communications were underway. So what was your stance when you were involved in such activities? Now that accident has taken place, well, it's not because of that accident, but in order to secure nuclear safety, this is the last bastion. The most important point here is to prevent a severe accident from happening. So we need to revert back to that starting point at every opportunity. So I was dealing with the matter with that point of view. Government officials, what they place importance on is that the IAEA is taking the fifth 5-layer to be the conventional wisdom, but Japan is not catching up with that level. I think the government officials consider that to be very important. So did you have the view that the 3 layers would not be sufficient? I'm sure that you have been promoting to raise that to 5-layer protection, but wasn't that the case? No, that was not my view. Preventing a severe accident, the last bastion needed to be protected fully, and I did have the view that was important. Maybe I asked you not the right way. This is now the rule around the world, and if NISA includes that into the regulations, the operator needed to comply with that, but you didn't incorporate that into the regulations. So then what the outcome of that was that the operators did not have to deal with this. That was not longer mandatory. That was only voluntary. Obviously, NISA wanted to include that in the regulations dealing with the severe accident. Didn't you want to include that in the regulation? Accident management was something that we had been working on since 1992. And the requirements of accident management to be incorporated into the law, there were developments around the world, and I was aware of those developments. Now, going a step further to actually work on that ourselves, maybe our efforts were not sufficient. Well, please answer either yes or no. NISA's standpoint, did you want to include that in the regulation? Can I take it that you wanted, NISA wanted to incorporate that into the regulations? Please answer yes or no. Did you or NISA wanted to include that in the regulations? Yes or no? Yes or no, please. Either yes or no. Can I take it that NISA wanted to include that? Yes or no. Either one will do. You wanted to include that in the regulations? The importance of accident management, we were aware of that. Did you want to include that in the regulations? Well, prevention of severe accident is the last bastion. So if there was an opportunity, accident management requirements should have been incorporated into the law. I was thinking that it would be important to incorporate that into the law. Why was it not possible to incorporate that into the regulation? Now, in hindsight, there are many things that we should have done better. Accident management, we were working on accident management since 1992. And after that, I cannot say that our efforts on accident management, well, it should have been enhanced further. We should have stepped up our efforts in this area, but our efforts were not sufficient. You are the regulator. You just have to write that into law. Why did you not write that into law? Who was opposed to that idea? Who was opposed to that idea? Well, we didn't have that concrete discussion. We didn't get to the level of where we had that discussion. Who did you have discussions with? Well, not nobody in particular. Inside NISA, you were having discussions with your subordinates inside NISA and didn't get to that level? Or are you saying that the discussion with the operators did not reach the level of incorporating that into the regulations? Well, inside NISA, we were not making further steps to get to that point. So there were people opposed to that idea inside the organization of NISA. That's not my understanding, but we just did not have that kind of discussion. Who decides whether to include that in regulation or not? Who decides? Director General of NISA. Who was the Director General of NISA at that time? At that time, when are you talking about? At what point in time? From 2005 through 2007. That is me. So in the end, you did not take that decision to include that in the regulations. Is that because you were not sure about the merit of including that in the regulation? my focus of my work was, like I said, enhancement of safety regulations for operation of nuclear power plants. That was the emphasis of my work. So in terms of priority, higher priority was being placed on that part of my work. When you regulate various activities, I'm sure that why is it that you have study sessions with experts of nuclear operators? Why is it that you hold such study sessions? To secure safety, the primary responsibility lies with the operator. And the regulatory authority must monitor and conduct surveillance of the operators. And therefore, the programs of safety measures at the operators must be understood by us. It's important that we understand what they are working on. In terms of including in the rules on matters on severe accident, did you have a study session on this subject matter? I don't have that memory. From the operators, did they voice any opposition to the idea of including these matters in the regulations? I don't have any recollection of that. Primary responsibility lies with the operators, you have said. Who has the primary responsibility of rulemaking? Rulemaking with respect to nuclear safety regulations, the primary responsibility lies with the NISA.
If the operator feels that this regulation is going to be added, it could incur additional cost, or it could be difficult to explain to the community citizens. Aside from that, the position of NISA is to decide independent of such. Is that true? Yes, you are right. Going backwards in history, when you were the DG of NISA, do you believe you were able to do so? Basically, that was my position. In 2006, we are talking about the new guideline, and the following day, NISA has issued the safety standards, which was the topic that was mentioned at the outset. Backcheck is a very important process. Now, other than backcheck, there's also what's called the backfit. Could you tell us the difference between the two? What's said as the backcheck is that when new standards are launched, you are going to see what the existing facilities are so that they are going to be checked. And you would launch whatever is possible with the existing facilities. Do what, sir? For example, if it's a seismic, then to strengthen from their seismic perspective. You evaluate, and the result of the simulation is just presented as a report. Isn't that so what entails? It will be evaluated, and by checking with the new guidelines, you look at how the reality is, and the reality is evaluated. And as a result, if necessary, then some things are to be, quote, strengthened. Okay. So let's say we have new regulations. In the past, we had different sets of regulations. And the regulations are set forth because they are rationale. Then you go backwards, retrospective, so as to see would it be regulated retroactive, or is it just the inspection that's going to be retroactive compared to the existing regulations? In line with the new sets of standards, if it's existing facilities, you try to see to what extent that the safety is assured. And that is what is being checked. So it's checked, evaluated, and reported, right? If it doesn't meet the regulations, then it will be violation of the regulation, because if you check the past facilities and if they are not in compliance with the new sets of standards, are they in violations of the existing regulations? Is that how you look at it? Once we have the new guidelines, how the existing facilities are to comply with the new sets of guidelines and standards would be decided in regard to the applicability of the new rules to the old facilities. Especially for the new facilities, naturally, the new sets of standards will be applied without doubt. But in regard to the existing facilities, as to how the new sets of regulations will be applied, is going to be organized as how it's going to go about. And there are two ways, right? There are two approaches at that time. One is to be retroactive and to apply this, which is backfitting. And the other is that it would not retrofit, but just to go backwards and carry out the check, and that's the back checking. So there are two options of back check and backfit. And I think you said organized. To which? Back check or backfit? In case of a seismic. No, which of the two? I don't want the reasons. Did you have it retroactive? Then if there was a conflict, it would be the violation of the new rules or new regulations. Thus, right away, you need to comply with the new sets of regulations by strengthening it. But if it's back check, you just go backwards. And if there are new sets of standards, you just inspect and report as to the result of the inspection. And whether you need to have a seismic strengthening is on a voluntary basis of the operator, is it not? In case of a seismic, it was concluded it was be back checking. Despite you had two approaches, why is it that you chose the back check, which is more left in the hands of the operators? Why? Ideally, backfitting is better. But basically, in the safety regulations, there are different standards and guidelines which are formulated. And we distinguish the existing reactors and the new reactors. And that's practical execution of the nuclear safety measures. So that for seismic standards, it was the back check that was applicable. Now, coming back to the report for Fukushima Daiichi, do you have the report at present, or do you know whether you have the report already for Fukushima number 1, Daiichi? I am aware that they're taking time for back-checking, and Fukushima Daiichi I don't know specifically about the status of the report to Fukushima number 1. Once you get the report, let's assume that there is a report, and would NISA inspect whether the seismic retrofit is carried out in line with the result of the report? There are inspectors at site, and in regard to the retrofitting for seismic structures, the on-site inspectors, in principle, are to carry out the inspection. If so, you are the one to receive the report, so you would know whether you get a report or not. Furthermore, in the report, you would be able to know what kind of measures will be taken to address a seismic. And you would also be in the position on part of NISA to know whether that was carried out, right? Basically, that's true. Have you asked back-checking should be expedited, or do you have the authority to guide that the retrofitting should be carried out ASAP? If there is a delay, NISA would be able to recommend they do it expeditiously. When you were the DG of NISA, in regard to the back-checking, were there any instances in which you asked the operators to expedite their efforts for compliance? When I was at NISA, I don't recall whether we have done so or not. Mr. Takekuro earlier was here in your seat, and up until 311 at Fukushima number 1, he did say that no back-checking was carried out. And at this point of time, to the extent we know of, back-checking has not been completed as of yet. Of course, retrofitting for the seismic reinforcement is not carried out. The budget of 80 billion yen is appropriate, but nothing is being used as of today, to the extent I know of. And although this may need to be scrutinized further, but having heard this, what do you think in regard to the rule of the back-checking? And as the one who was responsible in introducing back-checking, don't you think it should be back-fitting instead?
Back-checking is not making a progress. Yes, I am aware of that. But the NISA should have been more proactive and encouraging the operator to expedite. And in a sense, I think that has been necessary on the part of NISA. That should have been done. In the case of backfitting, the current situation belongs to whose responsibility? Who is responsible for the current situation? Suppose backfitting had been introduced. In the case of backfitting, on a mandatory basis, we ask operators or we require operators to comply with the regulation. So first, a seismic evaluation has to be conducted, and if there is a gap, and it is operator who is responsible for backfitting or the retrofitting. Yes, however, on the part of regulator, this is going to be an inadequate regulation done on the part of regulator. So backfitting, if backfitting is not done, then regulatory agency, of course, share responsibility for that situation. So you introduce back-checking. It seems that it could be interpreted that NISA tried to evade regulatory agencies' responsibility by introducing back-check. Wasn't it the case? No, we didn't consider that. A seismic properties differ from one plant to another, one facility to another. So each operator, regarding each facility, is expected to carry out appropriate back-checking. We thought that would be more appropriate practice. So, of course, from the viewpoints of operators, and there are diversity in terms of practice. So you thought it is not appropriate to carry out one-size-fits-all kind of regulation on different operators because the siting situation is different and also the facility, how it is constructed, structured is different from one site to another. So the conditions of each plant differs. So based on that, appropriate checking was necessary, we thought. So whether we should use back checking or back fitting, when we put things into perspective, did you have any study session with the utility? I don't have that memory. I don't think there was such meeting. So now that you have a back checking, however, in reality, Fukushima nuclear power plant from 2006 is now in the process of back checking. However, back checking has not been completed, and actually there has been almost nothing done in terms of back checking on the part of Fukushima. What is your view as the former DG of NISA? Back check. The result of back-checking, and this process has been procrastinated to this extent. And on this point, I think we should have a greater effort to encourage the operator to expedite back-checking process. Changing the gears, regarding off-site center, I have several questions. Now, off-site center has a governing law, which is Nuclear Accident Preparedness Act. And this law in 1999 was created in the face of JOC, Tokai Village nuclear accident. That is when the law was created. At the time of that accident, what was your position? At that time, I was the director in charge of nuclear fuel regulation at the Science and Technology Agency. At that time, you were not involved in the promulgation of this act, Nuclear Accident Preparedness Act. Based on the nuclear accident in Tokai Village, we decided to establish this law. I was mainly responsible for response to this accident. And I was also involved to some extent in the development of this law. That's right. So you were responding to the accident, and you were also deeply involved in the formulation of this law from the viewpoint of response. So in responding to accident, Offsite Center has a great role to play, right? And on the 31st of March of 2002, you were convened to the Select Committee for Disaster Preparedness of the lower house as a witness. Do you remember? You were summoned by this Select Committee. I don't remember exactly. And at that time, what was your position? You had been transferred to NISA already. By that time, that is 2002. What was your title? 2002. It says Deputy Director General of NISA. It says, and as a DDG of NISA, you were summoned to the Diet as a witness and made a statement regarding Offsite Center. And you were originally with the Science and Technology Agency before that, and at that time, you were involved in the development of Nuclear Accident Preparedness Act, and you are responsible for accident response. So you are expert in this area. You are specialized in this area. That is why you were summoned to the Diet. So please look at this on the screen. This is what you said in this select committee on that day, because the minute has been published. So please look at this. Regarding offsite center, you were asked to give explanation, and you explained the equipment and the facilities related to offsite center. And particularly, these are the facilities and equipments which have been prepared to respond to emergency situation. So in this diet response, you explained that the offsite centers are well prepared and adequately prepared. In retrospect, what do you assess? How do you assess this statement of yours? So these functions and these roles are expected of the offsite center. And we were about to establish offsite centers at that time. And we understand the intent of creating offsite center at that point in time. However, if we consider the last year's disaster, you can say that all of the things which are listed here have not been implemented or completed. What do you think of this? This special measures law, based on that, we were building offsite center at that time. But offsite centers themselves were to be introduced to prepare for a nuclear accident. However, these offsite centers could be affected by the accident. However, that was not assumed at that time. As a result of the lack of that kind of assumption, when nuclear accident occurred, offsite center we thought offsite centers could perform its original intended functions and roles. And for that purpose, we had a training and education session as well.
You're right. This is March 13, 2002 minutes. And you say that the Joint Council for Nuclear Accidents is to be established in this offsite center. In the case of nuclear emergencies, it says that the government, central government, local governments, and operators would come together to share information and to deliberate on countermeasures on a coordinated basis. And this is to be established inside the offsite center. That was the plan. But unfortunately, such a council body was not established inside the offsite center. When you were answering questions at this committee, what extent of accidents were you assuming in saying that this council is to be established inside the offsite center? What kind of gravity of accidents were you assuming? Inside a nuclear facility, many different accidents could happen. So this is to be a facility to respond to such accidents. So substantial accidents or disasters related to nuclear power generation was being assumed. But we didn't assume that the accident would be that grave as to have an impact or influence on the offsite center. The location of the offsite center, you were assuming that the consequences of the nuclear accident would not impact the offsite center, the location of the offsite center. You didn't assume that the radiation impact would be felt by the offsite center. It's not the case that we didn't assume that at all, but we thought that in the case that the offsite center would not function, then another different tentative location. What would be our options in looking at other tentative locations. We were looking at those other options as well. But as in the end, as you pointed out, when there was a nuclear accident, it is true that this offsite center we thought that it would be able to operate with its functions without having the influence of radiation. If there were no radiation influence on the offsite center, you believe that the offsite center would have been able to operate and fulfill its functions as was anticipated. Do you still believe so today, if there were no radioactive effect on the offsite center? I don't know to what extent it might have been possible, but the local the stakeholders and the people involved would have gathered at that offsite center to share information and exchange information, and that information would have been fed back to the headquarters in Tokyo. That was the scenario that we had painted, and I believe that that kind of function would have been performed by the offsite center to a great extent. Please take a look at this. This is also your statement in the diet. There is going to be a district, a section for the media, and reporters would stay there to share information. So with the media, you had already talked about these matters with the media, about these arrangements in the offsite center. The media and the offsite center, well, actual people on the ground. There were teams on the ground, and if media people get involved, it may render it rather difficult to properly have the offsite center function. So, for example, press briefings on a regular basis, or members of the media inside the offsite center, how they will be able to bring their PC and other equipment, securing some place for the media to place such equipment. We were discussing those matters with the media as to where they would be able to stay and put their equipment. Even at higher radiation levels, the reporters would like to report from a place closer to where the accident is happening. Were you willing to accept the members of the media if they wanted to report from the offsite center because it is closer to where the action is taking place? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because the members of the media, they are not people who are engaged in the work of radiation. So when there is an accident, if they are exposed to radiation, the level of tolerance is not high. I don't think you can allow these people to be exposed to radiation, because these are not those engaged in the radiation work. Of course, it depends on the level of radiation, but the members of the media, just because they are reporters, we cannot raise the tolerance level of radiation, the allowable level, to be different from those for the general public. Basically speaking, it's not possible. So the people in the private sector, if there is a certain level of radiation, you want people to refrain from using the center because of the level of radiation. But as for government officials, people working in the government, what was the level of radiation that you were prepared to allow people to be exposed to when you established the offsite center? Yes. Because the assumption here is that the government officials would gather at the offsite center to respond to the situation. You have an accident underway, so it cannot be irrelevant to the level of radiation. So even if the radiation level is at a certain level, at the level at which you would have to reject the members of the media and the members of the private sector to leave. But as for government officials, what was the plan? What level of radiation were you prepared to have government officials to be exposed to? Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to make these statements in the diet. What kind of radiation were you expecting to be tolerated by the government officials? Well, we didn't have a clear level in mind, but in order to respond to an emergency. In the case of public servants, we felt that because this is a matter of responding to the emergency, the importance of their duties was taken into consideration. Yes, because without that kind of understanding, there is no way that people can be gathered at this offsite center. But you had no standard in mind in establishing this offsite center. You were saying that you are an expert in this area, and you were involved in this, in formulating the act, and you became the Deputy Director General of NISA, and you were asked to make this statement in the Diet. So it's okay for you to say that what you had in mind, but you didn't have any clear criteria as to what level of radiation people would be allowed to stay in the offsite center, and beyond which people would have to be forced to leave the offsite center. You didn't have these criteria at all? The offsite center is there, and the influence coming from the accident, and as to the level of radiation to be tolerated, we didn't deliberate on that. We didn't actually look at that. Well, obviously, in the Diet, parliamentarians, they were asking questions. They asked you questions that the people would be exposed to radiation in the offsite center. These are questions that was raised from MPs, and your response at that time was that in terms of workers of radiation, this is a center, this is a facility that should not be a problem for people working on radiation. So what is the level? How many millisieverts was the limit, which was considered to be a tolerable level for those people working in the offsite center? Did you have a clear line? Because earlier you said that the people in the private sector, you cannot allow those people to be in that center because this is an abnormal situation. But when it comes to people working on radiation accidents, after taking certain measures, wasn't your purpose to allow these people to stay and work? What was the level of radiation that you were assuming? You didn't think about that at all?
Well, as for the nuclear operators, and when they engage in work at time of emergency, there is the upper limit of the tolerable irradiation level that is being set forth. It's not that it is defined in a clear-cut criteria in my mind. However, at the time of emergency, there is the level of tolerable irradiation level. That needs to be considered. With this accident, were there people at the NISA at the offsite center? And at the offsite center, were these people always at the offsite center from NISA? Did they stay there? I don't know the details. This is something that all Japanese and every Japanese knows. But you who created this is not aware of that? Is that what you're telling me? You're not interested? Is that it? I don't have a clear-cut memory. I think the audience would know. Every Japanese knew that all NISA people had evacuated themselves from the outside center. Why so? This is a center where the relevant people come together. And if the center with the relevant people is not going to function, then the offsite center itself will not function. Mr. Hirose, as has been said, on part of NISA, you have 4 missions. One is to have the strong mission to engage in work. The second is scientific and rational decisions. The third is to have the transparency and to have the accountability. And the fourth is to be neutral and to be fair. And at all times, when you were the Director General of NISA, I was told that you stressed this to all the members of NISA. So you didn't have this mentality. Something is not quite right. Maybe we should move on to the next question. We might come back to a question. Just because you're no longer the DG, I mean, you were the expert, so we have a high expectations. As long as you set the standards and what's to be done, people can act. But nothing was decided, so everybody was afraid, and the center was not functional. So if the center is not functional, people might decide they can't make any contribution. In that light, we can understand. However, maybe the designing of the offsite center was not correct. I want you to be responsible in having created the offsite center in this manner. What would you say to this? When the Nuclear Disaster Prevention Act was enacted, we introduced creation of the offsite center. And it was basically based on the examples in the UK that we created the offsite center. In that sense, at the time of nuclear disaster and how the offsite center would function, if I'm asked the question whether I was fully aware of the functionality of the offsite center, I would have to say that I wasn't able to do so in sufficient manner. Let me change gear. Another opinion you rendered to the Diet about nuclear disaster drills. You also explained about this. Can you see this one? The word EPZ comes in, and to what extent would the people would have to be evacuated? This is an issue with the range. The EPZ was set as a yardstick to set forth the range. What was the range of the district that EPZ had stipulated? In case of EPZ, it's between 8 to 10 kilometers. That's what we have in mind. You felt that was sufficient? Having experienced the Fukushima accident, At this point of time, I would not be able to say it was sufficient. At that time, how did you feel? Did you feel it was sufficient that EPZ would be between 8 to 10 kilometers? And at that time, you felt that as a zone, 8 to 10 kilometers would be sufficient? And did you feel that with confidence at that time? In regard to 8 to 10 kilometers of EPZ, at that time, I felt that it was appropriate. At the diet, you have also stated that we have even considered some unforeseeable technical possibilities and added some cushion or latitude. As for the unforeseeable technical incidents, what kind of incidents did you have in mind? And even so, you felt 8 to 10 kilometers was sufficient. What were the scenarios you had in mind? When we had the drills, we did assume of different scenarios of the possible nuclear accidents. For example, the cooling pump, for example, might break down, and as a result, something else would also break down. So, one after another, we would see the breakdown of 1 or 2 or 3 equipments or facilities one after another. And these would be occurring continuously. And we thought occurrence of such would be a small probability. But in an accident like this, as for the internal events, different equipments, different devices might break down. And that's what we had in mind. And for these internal events to take place within certain span of time, one after another, in a continuous manner, we felt that in reality that the probability would be extremely small. Technically, as for something that would not occur, inclusive, did you consider this as a hypothetical accident? What would be, let's say there's a hypothetical accident. What will be the level of irradiation? You must have assumed that. And to what extent will it have effect towards the human? And that's how you would decide the EPZ. So the probability of hypothetical accident will be low, but should it happen, then there could be emittance of certain level of radiation. And to what extent and how many people is it going to pose the effects? And as a result, you would decide on the EPZ. What was the radioactive level that would be emitted? And what's the level you assumed for such hypothetical accident? At the time of the safety assessment in siting a nuclear power plant, especially for serious accidents and or hypothetical accidents, we would set forth the appropriateness of the EPZs. And such will be checked as a result. But even with such an accident, in regard to the EPZ, so long as that's been assured, we felt that the people outside of EPZ would not be impacted much. That was our position. So that was the evaluation we rendered.
So you talked about hypothetical accident in relation to EPZ. In designating EPZ, because of hypothetical accident, certain radioactivity release has to be assumed, and also you have to consider the possibility of radioactive release exceeding the hypothetical level. And it says you consider impact on human health and others in designating EPZ. So initial release of radioactivity would be very important. The calculation of the initial release of radioactivity is very important. And Mr. Madarame, the chair of the NSC, came to this committee meeting. The initial calculated values, when you consider area to be designated as EPZ, if we are to establish a nuclear power plant on this location, we have to say that such and such amount would be the maximum amount of release of radioactivity, and such a back calculation was done. So a severe hypothetical accident, and that kind of assumption is based on certain rule. So that procedure is used in order to come up with a hypothetical accident and calculate hypothetical level of radioactive release in order to set a EPZ surrounding the nuclear power plant. So it isn't that we come up with the area first, and then we conduct a back calculation to come up with a hypothetical accident. I don't think that was the case. I asked this question to Mr. Madarame. The amount of released radioactive substance was beyond assumption of hypothetical accident. And do you know how many times higher than the assumed radioactive release in the case of Fukushima Daiichi this time? I do not know exactly. However, total amount of radioactivity in the case of iodine, 10 to the power of 17 becquerel. That is in the case of iodine. And that is my view. So there is a difference of 10,000 times compared to the original calculation. So hypothetical accident never happens according to you. However, it occurred. And actual release amount is extremely high compared to hypothetical release amount. Why is it that such a huge gap exists? The calculation was wrongly done. I don't think that is necessarily the case. The assessment of hypothetical accident is based on certain rule. And in the case of Fukushima accident this time, the huge amount of radioactivity was released, which went beyond hypothetical release amount. So hypothetical accident is something which would not happen. However, accident actually occurred. In view of the actual accident, we have certain amount of release of radioactivity, and if we designate EPZ based on the actually released radioactive amount, how wide would that EPZ be? Well, I'm not sure, but in this case, the evacuation zone, a 30-kilometer radius from the accident, was set. So this evacuation zone of 30-kilometer radius from the plant, I think it was an appropriate range in my view this time. I am layman, but other nuclear power plants are still using as assumption the hypothetical amount which was also used for Fukushima Daiichi. So still, that assumed level is prevailing, right? We carry out assessment of the hypothetical severe accident, and based on that, we issue license to site a nuclear power plant. However, if there is a high population density, you cannot set a EPZ, right? Right, EPZ. Within EPZ, we assume that ordinary people will not go inside evacuation zone, EPZ. Actually, people standing outdoors in the EPZ for 1 year, what happened to this person? That is the basis of assessment. So that means there is a gap of 10,000 times in terms of radioactivity values. Then if we are to use this value, those people who are living in this area have to evacuate from the EPZ, or if they want to continue to live in this zone, a nuclear power plant have to be removed, conversely speaking. In the case of Fukushima, because such an accident occurred, however, in the case of other nuclear power plants other than Fukushima, as you pointed out, the siting license related evaluation, the method for that has to be reviewed whether or not that was appropriate in view of the recent accident in Fukushima. I think that is going to be the way forward. However, what would be the ideal procedure? I don't know yet. Since you are specialized in nuclear matters, I'm asking this question. So, therefore, a siting license of other nuclear power plants, the assumed or projected release amount of radioactivity for other power plants were the same as the Fukushima. The hypothetical severe accident would depend on where nuclear power plant is sited. So, this hypothesis is related to where we can site a nuclear power plant. If certain major accident occurred, to what extent people surrounding the nuclear power plant would be exposed to radiation, and of course population density has to be considered as one factor.
If that's the case, and if you need to replace the previous numbers with a new one, hypothetical accidents are improbable accidents that is beyond the existing accidents. That means the radiation level will be really, really great. If we are to allow nuclear power plants to continue to operate, then the people living in the neighboring communities would all need to evacuate and leave. Is that the correct understanding? Now, this accident, the cause and the response to the accident, and the previous method used for safety screening. You are speaking on the assumption that the two are related. But this relationship between the two elements must be reviewed in close detail, because the view at the time of siting and the release of radioactive material after an accident. Well, okay. Your explanation can be understood by no one in Japan. Let me turn to a different question. NSC, discussion with NSC in 2006 was reported in newspapers. Are you aware of that? Yes. In April of 2006, you accepted the IAEA's view, and NSC would like to consider new guidelines. When such developments were underway, NISA to NSC, you issued a memo. Who was the Director General of NISA at that time? Me. What was written in this memo? Memo from Nuclear Disaster Preparedness Division said that to the NSC, the memo said, well, actually, new international standards. The memo requested a cautious study of and careful study of the new international criteria. It's this on the screen. This is posted on the website of NSC, so it can be made public. It's mentioned here. Various disaster prevention measures that Japan has been working on. The current scheme is to be revised greatly. And if that is to be changed greatly, this could fan anxiety of the people in Japan toward nuclear power safety. And the request is to freeze the current deliberation underway by the NSC. This is a strong request. Did this have your authority? Did this have your approval? I don't recall approving this memo. My view was that the new international criteria for disaster preparedness is based on a new approach, different from the conventional approach. And therefore, I wanted to request for a prudent and careful consideration. So my approach was to ask them to conduct such a careful consideration. Well, your interpretation of the word approval was taken in a narrow sense. But you did get reports from your subordinates about the issuing of this memo. I don't have that recollection. I don't remember. Would you like to take a look at the minutes? This is confidential. I cannot make this public. But if you take a look at this, maybe this would refresh your memory. It seems that you have been reported and briefed in detail about this. This is a very important matter, and it's never possible to issue such a memo without the knowledge of the Director General. Nuclear safety, nuclear disaster prevention. Well, I don't want to hear your excuses. In issuing this memo, did you get briefed by your people, by your colleagues, before issuing this memo? I don't have that memory. Would you like to take a look at this? This is the minutes of the meeting you had in NISA about this briefing on this memo. This should refresh your memory. Nuclear safety and nuclear disaster prevention. Well, getting the understanding of the local people is extremely important, especially for disaster prevention. The central government and the local community must work together. That was my understanding. In 2006, in deliberating the new international criteria, in studying the new criteria, the local community must be included in this study. I was wondering whether such an approach was possible, because NISA must work together with the local community. We have been working to develop disaster preparedness together with the local communities over many, many years. And now that that was developed and that we were in a position to further enhance such disaster preparedness in a solid fashion, rooted in the ground, I thought that was important. And when such studies of international criteria was to get started, well, I thought that what is important is to get the understanding of the local people, to try to foster and generate local feasibility in conducting these studies. That was my intention. Well, about an hour and a half ago, I asked this question that NISA, this organization, or NSC, and there's a check and balance relationship between NSC and NISA. NSC has issued this very important guideline, and there's a check and balance relationship between NSC and NISA, and NISA would implement the guidelines generated by NSC. Isn't that what you said? Well, it is NISA that would work closely together with the local community to try to implement these measures. So when a new approach is presented based on such a new criteria and international criteria, when such studies are to be commenced, rather than local communities trying to catch up with that level afterwards, I thought that the local people need to be involved from the outset. Well, my question earlier was that NISA is under the umbrella of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. When you make important decisions as a government institution, you have the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. So you will get the approval of the minister, the competent minister. There is the line of command. Inside METI, there is a division to promote nuclear power generation. There is a conflict here, and therefore NSC exists to make sure that there are no distorted policies in place. Isn't that the arrangement? When you talk about local communities, aren't you talking about power operators? Power companies? No, when I talk about local communities, I refer to people or local government. Each local government and municipality has their own disaster plans. So such a framework of disaster prevention, you need to have collaboration between the central government and local governments to come up with such plans. And with respect to this new international criteria, international standard, this is a new notion, a new concept. So this is something that has to be looked at together with the local governments. And that is why I said a cautious approach is required.
In the process of changes and transition of the regulations, there are people who are promoting the nuclear energy and those who are regulating this. The people had concerns that they are housed under one ministry. But in order to assure the soundness, NISA was to be supervised by NSC. Something like this, I believe, should not be carried out. Don't you agree? I hate to repeat myself, with your permission. In regard to the disaster prevention of nuclear power plants, this is something that needs to be integral efforts on part of the national government and the local governments, so that, especially for disaster prevention, the local governments wanted to consider from the outset. No, it's okay. You're just repeating what you said. But from the perspective of the people, this is not approved. You've been briefed. So nobody's taking accountability, right? But looking backwards, it's a sentence that we don't know who was the drafter. This is something so important, but because you did it the way you did, because you felt that there are some risk. You've been briefed in enough, but still, how is it that you came up with sentences like that, despite that? In part, I shall be repeating myself, but no, it's a different question, so the response has to be different. For nuclear disaster prevention, we need to solicit the understanding of the local community, and the interest of the local community would have to be coordinated. It's okay. In the latter part, it says there will be additional financial burden, and that is stated as the reason for opposition. What does this mean? You need to have the improvement and availability of the equipment and facilities for disaster prevention. What was the position of NSC after this sentence or these words were issued? Do you know? I don't know. Did you rebut? I'm not aware of that. Would you like to see this once again? It's written here if you wish to see it. Somebody in the audience shouted, respond to the question. And the chair instructed the people in the audience should not make any statement. Can I ask you a question? NISA was talking with whom, and for whom was NISA regulating? NISA was trying to solicit the understanding of the community because we thought that was extremely important to assure the safety and the disaster prevention. And the activities of NISA were focused quite substantially towards the community. Please explain to the way that the people could understand. Now, what did NSC instruct NISA to do? And why is it that you said that's not something that could be done? The NSC started considering the new international standards. And I basically was in support of introduction of the international standards. That was my basic position. However, in terms of disaster prevention, you need to understand there is much involvement from the local governments and local community. That I understand. Let me summarize. If you did as NSC has instructed, then the area for disaster prevention would have expanded in scope, right? Did it expand or did it not expand? The people in the gallery don't understand. They only said that they need to expand the area to carry out the drills in line with international standards. But the international standards have changed quite a bit. I just want to know whether the scope of the area expanded. Was it possible to carry out the drills in a more expanded area or space? if you resort to the new concept, the area would be expanded. The area would be expanded. But the existing area was limited, so that you wanted to expand this so as to extend the draw, involving more people. But the community might reject this, or there could be additional financial burden. That's why you decided to forego with this. But with the accident actually taking place this time, if you had expanded the area, then the evacuation could have done in a more organized or appropriate manner. Wouldn't you agree to that? I am speaking of what I had in mind at that time. And it was a set of international standards that was different from the past. And after the enactment of the Nuclear Disaster Prevention Act, we have created the setup to address the disasters. However, what we wanted to do is to implement that. But that's because the international situation has changed because of 9/11 and other efforts. It's maybe that it's not an operational error. That's why there is IAEA. And what is important is how to do it. And you were the DG of NISA, and you also serve as a Director General. So you should have endeavored to do what needs to be done. I mean, why is it that you say this here and now? And to whom did you? It's not your idea, you say. Is that true? Well, no, what I want to say, it's okay what you want to say, but I just want to stress what your position had been. There was a way to investigate and check. I mean, there is a document like this. Everybody knows about it. It's the way of doing the investigation and consideration. I wanted more involvement from the local community. So what efforts have you done in order to involve the local citizens? As I listen to you, there's something that I have understood. In the beginning, you said that you don't remember, but as we talk, it seems that it is in your memory. You said this was what I had in mind. So it seems that you remember what took place then, although you responded. You didn't at the outset. In regard to this new international standards, we wanted to be careful in considering this. And you asked me what my position and what my thoughts were. But as I have said, I wanted to do it together with the involvement with the local community. You say the local community so many times. They would feel if the area had been expanded and if drills were conducted, the local community would have been so happy today. You say local community and local citizens. That's what has been expected by the local citizens. When you say local, you're not talking about the local citizens, or local whom are you talking about? When I say local governments, I have local governments in mind. Well, it's been different from how things were addressed in the past. So when something like this is to be introduced, you need to have consideration and preparations before anything can be introduced. You need to coordinate with the local governments. And I feel that's mandatory. That is my position.
When you say local, it's not local residents. I understand listening to explanation today. I wasn't clear, but when you say local, that's local governments, not local residents, like Fukushima Prefecture. And the prefecture said that such a introduction of such a new concept cannot be accepted. That's why you responded in this way, right? Well, when I say local, I say local, including when I say local government, that includes local residents. as well. So it isn't that local government in a narrowly defined word. Maybe some people think that it would be burdensome to expand the drill area. However, if that would be necessitated, I don't think there is a local residents who would oppose to conducting such a expanded drill. So expansion of drill area will be the possibility. But the totally new concept, which are different from the pre-existing concept, was to be introduced. So we have to digest this new concept. Unless we do that, we won't be able to get local support. I am local. I'm representing local. I was living in the 4-kilometer radius. I never participated in disaster prevention drill. And you said you give priority to local government or local residents. However, if you like to give priority to local, I understand what NISA was doing, and I understand why NISA officials left the offsite center immediately before anybody else. And I could confirm under Mr. Hirose, whether there was instruction or not. However, under such a boss, NISA officials were first to evacuate because of radiation, because of the power failure. We were there overnight, but NISA officials immediately left the site before anybody else. I want to say that. How do you respond? So when you say local, so this is the voice of local resident. You earlier mentioned local government. You said additional financial burden is to be caused to local. That local includes local power operator and the local government who have to carry out expanded drill. Or do you mean to say local residents that you gave priority to? Well, once again, at the risk of being repetitive, what I mean when I say local is, of course, local government and local residents. As of 2006, the new international criteria standard, the way of thinking in this criteria was very different from the ones that existed before. Therefore, thorough examination and thorough deliberation was needed before the introduction of such new concept. Without that, maybe you would scold me by saying this, but by introducing such a new concept without good preparation, that would cause confusion in the society. Yes, I understand, because you have been saying that repetitively. But in 2006, and there was an accident in the United States, E5V was introduced, right, when you were DG of NISA. And did you plan to take any action? Or was there any objection in doing so? So you were Director General of NISA. So another question, that your successor, you were a specialist of nuclear issue, and your successor was selected by you. And why is it that you selected such a person to succeed you? Well, I do not have the authority to select my successor. So it is METI who selected him. So that means NISA has no independence from the ministry. So the minister makes the decision regarding the personnel matter. Your successor, I don't know. You have been involved in government matter for many years, and you don't know who has the authority for personnel matter. Every day, if I go to a government office, everybody is talking about personnel issues. If you are not if you didn't recommend or nominate this person, who made a final decision then? The minister, right? So the NISA DG, even above NISA DG, the decision is made above DG of NISA. So who would be sitting above NISA DG for such a decision making? We have a administrative vice minister. we have head of the minister's secretariat, and the final decision is to be made by the minister, right? So that means the ministry's view would be reflected on personnel matter. So that means NISA is part of METI in implementing policies. So NISA was part of METI or METI. So NISA within the METI is responsible for nuclear safety regulation and the industrial safety regulation. So NISA is a body belonging to the ministry. That means you have the shared interest, same interest within the ministry, because there could be no conflicting interest within one ministry. So within ministry, NISA is located. It is true that NISA is part of the METI. Lastly, let me ask you the final question. So at the end of the day, for public safety, you have to protect public life, human life. And was it your primary job assignment, job description, protecting human life of Japanese people? The industrial safety and nuclear safety, the protecting people's safety at large is the mission of NISA when we conduct these two policies. However, listening to your explanation today, the designation of EPZ, for example, at the time of nuclear power plant siting license, perhaps you would carry it out the calculation. Maybe you didn't intentionally distort the calculation, but there is a 10,000 times a gap. So such a huge gap could not have been produced unless your policy has been distorted. I think it is inevitable that people would consider that way, and you left that practice unchanged. And IAEA has a new recommendation, and Nuclear Safety Commission wanted to introduce new IAEA criteria. And it is a fact that NISA tried to stop that move. And we have minutes of meeting and record, and you tried to stop NSC from introducing IAEA criteria. And expansion of evacuation zone and drill zone was to be expected under the new guideline of IAEA. However, you didn't make any change. So every year, just like business as usual, the perfunctory drill was conducted every year. So then, do you think that NISA served the interests of people? NISA was useful? When we invited Mr. Terasaka, DG, although DG of NISA he was, but he left the Prime Minister's office after the accident without performing his own duties. And also, offsite center was evacuated by all the NISA officials after the accident. This is what happened. So with this actuality, do you think NISA was serving the interests of the Japanese public? You were there to protect primarily human life in this country. But do you confidently say that you performed this duty? The NISA's officials, since the inception of this agency, maybe you would scold once again, but all the time, around the clock, NISA officials have been engaged in their responsibility. Maybe you would say we were incapable, but in their own positions and roles, NISA officials withstanding the tension, perhaps causing tension to their family members, NISA officials have been working so hard. So NISA, together with officials, I am proud of the fact that I have been working with NISA officials in the past.
But in terms of the work that we have done, as the chairman asked me whether I have anything to say to my successors, from design to securing safety of operation, once you get to that stage, well, this is something that I reflect back to say that developments of documentation, including quality assurance and safety management, development of documents started to take up a large proportion of our work. That is something that I regret. I think we need to look at the site, take a look at what is happening on the ground with my own eyes. And it should be in that reality that we should check where the weaknesses are. That kind of an approach was needed. I think we started to deviate away from such an approach. Well, I think you're reflecting on different points. It's obvious that workers, the staff of NISA, worked very hard. Yes, I do agree so. But these employees of NISA, why did they end up receiving criticism? I have to ask your responsibility in rendering the organization to be the target of criticism. I'm not talking about the amount of documentation. Mr. Hirose, what do you have to say? At the time of you stepping down from DG, Chuetsu earthquake did occur. And there was a lot of attempts to do a cover-up. You are the person responsible. You developed many rules and you wrote many books. But I just wonder, and the people of Japan wonder, what you were doing. And the minister gave instructions to expose everything. Well, the workers on the ground are working very hard. But if the people at the top are not doing a good enough job, then people don't follow you. So, Mr. Hirose, well, I just am surprised at the timing of events. I do feel sorry for you. You write in this preface that the situation has changed in the book. But when it comes to nuclear power and radiation, these are comprehensive technologies. And there is potential risk in nuclear power and radiation. And in order to make use of such technology in the society, there has to be continued technical development. At the same time, you have to develop the system and comply with the system, and you need to continue to improve the system governing these technologies. You talk about local communities. The local communities are the people of Japan. You have to have that awareness. Otherwise, young people in your organization would not follow your leadership. Mr. Terasaka did admit to many shortcomings. Because you are the person who are knowledgeable about these technologies. It's only after you have that recognition and awareness that people working under you would follow you. This is not just unique to Japan, but I say that for all of the organization, for those people responsible in responsible positions, do you have that awareness on a daily basis? When there is an accident, how you take responsibility of the problems that have occurred is at issue. So when problems do occur, the essence of the organization is revealed. Because you are in such a position and you did not take responsibility, the trust and the confidence in this country is now melting down. I'm sure that the members of the commission have many things to say to you, but we just wonder why things degenerated in this fashion. We hope to continue to have dialogue with the local communities in Fukushima. We are getting a lot of responses. There are touching accounts of people suffering on the ground. So we need to revert back to our starting point, to work with people responsible. You may not no longer be DG, but you are an advisor to the Cabinet Office. You should speak up what you must. And the NISA, the organization that you worked on, and as well as Science and Technology Agency, there has to be some message that you would like to convey to your successors. And I said a similar thing to Mr. Takekuro, the fellow of TEPCO, because all of these actions and small steps would go toward restoring the confidence into the nation. I know that other members of this commission would like to say more, but because of time, we would like to draw this meeting to a close. We've had this major accident. I'm sure that you had your good intentions at that time, but you need to show your responsibility with your actions. People are watching what kind of actions you take in the case of an accident or major events. I do hope to have more opportunities to speak with you, Mr. Hirose. Thank you very much. And I have to say this. I'm sure that there are more questions that people want to ask, but it is time to draw this meeting to a close. And Mr. Hirose, thank you very much. Next commission meeting is scheduled for mid-April. We would like to adjourn this meeting at this juncture. Thank you. This is an announcement to the members of the media. The press conference, as we have announced to you, it will start from 4:45. 4:45 is the starting time of the press conference. Thank you.
です。これでいいんですか？これで。ちょっと短いような気が。ちょっとこれ前です。です。です。
カメラの方、ここでいいですか？もっと後ろの方がいいですか？ここでいいですか？大丈夫ですか？はい。
もちろん。ちょっと時間差で。